But the other point I make is that they're making cracks at this regime. Like the Women Life Freedom movement, there are women going around uncovered in Iran. Like it's small changes.
They've actually gotten an ease of a lot of the restrictions with a tremendous amount of on the ground like protests and people have died as a consequence. People have been jailed as a consequence of this. We're going to be talking about Iran. We're going to be talking about Cuba and a lot more. Welcome to the broadcast, Ben. I have a gift here. This is, did you eat already?
I mean, a little bit.
Okay, well, this is goulash. This is a Turkish delicacy that we eat during Ramadan.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can try it and tell me if you like it. I haven't even tried this one yet, but this is like one of my, it's a dessert.
Yeah, it's sweet.
Yeah, oh, it's very sweet.
Oh, it's good.
Okay. Hold on.
All right, so you can't get that here.
No, this is, well, I mean, my mom.
You can, but
my mom went and found it somewhere. I don't know, but Anya, what's in it? What's in the goulash? Nishasta. No, I don't know what nishasta is, Mom. Starch. Is it starch?
Yeah, it's starch, layers of really thin starch.
Yeah, there's napkins here too.
Yeah.
For just during this month, and then.
And this is just usually a Ramadan.
Just Ramadan.
Yeah.
It's water, sugar, and rose water. That's why it's called goulash. It means rose. So.
All right, this is great. I didn't expect this.
Yeah. All right, Ben Rhodes, welcome to the broadcast. We had a long conversation at Abdul Al Sayed's fundraiser, and it was a very interesting conversation. And ever since then, I've been meaning to have you on. And unfortunately, this is probably the best possible time to have you on, but also simultaneously the worst possible time for the world in general. You were National Security Advisor in the Obama administration, and you were there in the room for at least, I'm very critical of Barack Obama, it's not a secret, but 2 key foreign policy initiatives that I always ride for, that I've always defended, normalization and ease of restrictions on Cuba, and also the JCPOA, which I think was a crowning achievement of the Obama administration's foreign policy. Now, obviously, we have a lot of areas of agreement, especially since then. I feel like your views have also evolved.
I've definitely evolved
quite a bit since that moment, since your time in the White House, and it's an interesting time to have this conversation. One of the things that I consistently talk about is how American foreign policy oftentimes is regarded as uniparty, and I also certainly say that as well. And there is definitely a uniparty component to foreign policy, but the one area where American foreign policy genuinely changed was in the post-Obama world, where Barack Obama's actions, specifically with the JCPOA, and I would love for you to describe it to those who don't know in the chat what the JCPOA was a pivotal moment. And the reason why I think it's a pivotal moment is because it was panned by the Democratic Party as well. There were definitely a lot of people who are still in power within the party.
The current Senate minority leader voted against it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there was a very disrespectful moment where Benjamin Netanyahu was invited to Congress to deliver a speech in front of the entirety of Congress, even though plenty of Democrats actually chose not to attend. There were still a lot of Democrats that did go and attend that speech. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because when Donald Trump came into power, I think we offered Israel the driver's seat in our Middle Eastern policy. Like, they've always played a consulting role. Israel is seen as this like reliable and very valuable ally. Israel's interests align with our interests in the region. It's a resource-rich region, and obviously we have different partners in the region as well. But like, they're not as seen as stable or as reliable as Israel has always been historically. But I think in the Trump administration, under Trump 1, there were a lot of decisions that were made that went against decades of precedent. Went against decades of precedent. Where Israel's wishes were fulfilled. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem was a huge deal. Now, after Donald Trump lost the election in 2020, Joe Biden became president, but Joe Biden also had some ideological commitments to Israel. And I think that was part of the reason why the Biden administration did not reverse some of these policies. One, because it would have been
100%,
it would have been too difficult of a battle to fight.
They could have gone into the JCPOA on day one, and they didn't.
Exactly. So my question for you is, now we're in the second Trump administration, and we're even moving further, allowing Israel to seize control over the steering wheel, directing Middle Eastern policy. And as we're at the precipice of potentially striking Iran again in an incredibly costly military quagmire that might even collapse this country, depending on how far it goes, do you feel like there is a do you feel like the Democratic Party is falling short of what's necessary?
Oh yeah, I feel like the Democratic Party is falling short, and there's so much to unpack in that, Hasan. But I, just on the Democratic Party today, look, we are on the verge of fighting a war that 80% of the American people don't want to fight, that could be absolutely catastrophic for this country, for obviously Iranians, but for countries across the region too. Because if you have an implosion of Iran, you could have 10 million refugees into Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan. We could go through those consequences. And so here's an issue that is politically popular on the left and the right. It's one of the few things people agree on in this country is they don't want more wars. The timing makes no sense. There's nothing that has happened in Iran that suggests that we need to mass the largest military force since Iraq there. And yet the Democrats are doing something, right? So the vehicle, Ro Khanna has been very good on this issue, and he and Thomas Massie have basically are forcing a vote on essentially a congressional break on Trump having the authority to act. And, you're seeing the Democrats kind of sign on, but if you look at their body language, right? If the fight is about, ACA healthcare subsidies, like they are out there doing press conferences, they're out there beating the drum, they're, traveling the country. They look uncomfortable. Not all Democrats. There's some very good Democrats on this issue, I should say. We can go, Ro Khanna, AOC, Ilhan Omar, but Chris Van Hollen, Tim Kaine, it's an interesting mix of people. But the leadership, looks like, well, this isn't really the battle we want to fight, which doesn't, objectively make sense because it's an 80-20 issue, right? And do you really trust Donald Trump to do the war in Iran competently and effectively? Well, we shouldn't be doing it anyway, morally and ethically. But why would we want to essentially...
The NatSec jumped out of you for a second when you said, do we really trust Trump in Iran?
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, we are far too comfortable with bombing countries. And I own my participation in that for 8 years. I'm happy to talk about it. Like you say, I've evolved on a lot of these things. But what are the, so what does that tell you? Like, and to me, there's a mix of things, right? Some of it, is like there's a correlation between the kinds of Democrats who've taken money from AIPAC and who've been very reticent to speak out on issues related to Palestine and this issue. Some of it is this kind of like trauma buried deep in the Democratic psyche from the post 9/11 moment, where it's like they're going to call us weak and we'll lose elections, which is, runs in the face of multiple elections in which Democrats voters rewarded people that didn't want to get us in wars,
including Donald Trump,
including Donald Trump,
but not limited to Donald Trump, who ran as an anti-war candidate 3 times now.
Yeah.
It was much more difficult for him to do so in 2020 because, it was the Trump administration. But he did successfully win twice.
Well, and Barack Obama ran in 2008 as an anti-war candidate. He never would have gotten elected president if he wasn't against the Iraq war and Hillary Clinton voted for it.
Yeah.
In 2012, he ran as the more diplomacy-forward candidate. Mitt Romney was the hawk. So in every single presidential election since 2004, with the exception of 2020, which is a weird election because I'm not sure Joe Biden wins that without COVID. But every single election, Americans are saying, hey, we don't want these wars. It's a left-right issue, convergence. And yet the political leadership in the Democratic Party is not where its voters are, and it's not even where the caucuses are. Most Democrats in the House and Senate, I think, are against this. It's kind of a leadership issue.
Yeah. And the leadership seemingly has been whipping votes behind closed doors, or at least like trying to engineer an alternative where the Democrats don't even speak out against it, with the exception of those who have actually been bold and have come out and spoke out against going to war with Iran. But unfortunately, as we've seen from both Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, there's not a lot of appetite on the leadership side to present a message. I want to ask you how you felt seeing Chuck Schumer come out and have, hold on, I'm going to pull it up real quick, have these words, because the Gang of Eight had a conversation. Where is it? The Gang of Eight had a conversation with I believe someone
Rubio,
with Marco Rubio, yeah. And Chuck Schumer's only response in the aftermath of that, when he was asked, was, where is it? Was something that we've heard many times over. Actually, it was an aesthetic response. Here it is.
And the administration has to make its case to the American people.
What did you hear?
The administration has to make its case to the American people, as though he's been fulfilled. I mean, he's been filled in about what's going on. He understands the moment, the necessity for war with Iran, and it's just, if only the public heard about it. Do you feel like Chuck Schumer is in opposition to a war with Iran, whether it's Donald Trump doing it or anyone else doing it, really?
I mean, it seems like he's going to end up voting for this bill, and maybe because there's been a lot of pressure, frankly, for him to vote for this bill that tries to constrain Trump. Look, if you look at his body language there, though, he just got a briefing that of why we're going to war with Iran, because we should not be going to war with Iran. And this pivot to process, they need to make their case. They kind of need to go through the old motions of. I mean, it's like saying we need a WMD campaign. We need some fabricated intelligence. What kind of case would Donald Trump make? Like, do you really think that would answer any of the mail here? And what's missing is a moral argument of like it is time for this country to stop getting into war after war. A policy argument, like nobody fucking voted for people to launch a war in Iran. We have cost of living crisis in this country. Like there are all kinds of avenues to attack what is clearly like a terrible idea. And he instead kind of retreats to this process point, which to me is kind of the lowest common denominator. Who could disagree with the idea that they must make the case? But that's not meeting people's energy where they are, which is that we could go during this live stream, we could learn that we've started bombing Iran. Yeah. And there's no urgency there, right? There's no sense of like, I've just heard something very alarming and this needs to stop. This does not need to happen. This should not happen. Instead, it's this kind of process point.
Yeah, look, I wasn't in any administration. I'm 34 years old. I'm just a guy in the sidelines. And from my perspective, when I hear the leader of the Democratic Party say this, to me that reads as, I kind of want Trump to foot the bill for this politically, and I don't mind if he does this. I don't mind if he does this. I just want to come across like I'm subtly nudging him in the opposite direction without any real pushback whatsoever. And I think a lot of Americans do also recognize that, and that's where that voter apathy comes from, the idea that both parties are not really going to represent my interests. No matter what happens, I still got to go to work and I got to worry about that. Clearly, there is no reason for me to pay attention to politics. Do you feel like this is one of those moments as well where Americans look at this and go, what am I going to do? Yeah,
and there's a political piece and a national security piece. On the political side, when it's not an issue that you want to really take on, right, as you're saying, you retreat to kind of Washington process speak. We need to make the case, or we need to have legislative process on this, or it's not taking a position on the policy. It's just kind of, I can be against this through a process door instead of like going out there and taking a stand against a war with Iran. Yeah. There's a bigger point though on the national security side, and this includes Congress, but also includes people that were in jobs like mine, is that, and I had this phrase for the Blob, which was meant to refer to the kind of groupthink of people in national security in both parties. The conversations that those people have inside of rooms would make absolutely no sense to the vast majority of Americans. They're so inside of the machinery of American national security policy, the momentum towards the thing like war. If it seems like it's happening, then we need to make it work, or we need to figure out how to do it better, like kind of what I said earlier, instead of just stepping back and saying like, this is crazy, why are we doing this, and why do we do this again and again? And look, some people are doing it for clear reasons, right? So, Israel has long had an interest. I've never been in politics without Bibi Netanyahu wanting the United States to remove the Iranian government through a military operation. So, their interest is very clear and it's very long-standing.
Okay, let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Have you considered that they're a week away from a nuclear weapon?
After the Iranians, after their program was obliterated.
Okay.
By the way, I spent 8 years studying the Iranian nuclear program. It was neither obliterated nor is it a week away from a nuclear weapon.
Okay, but have you considered that? Imagine a world, let me pitch it to you. Imagine a world where the Iranian nuke is a week away, though. We got to do it. We got to bomb them a little bit, right? We got to do something.
Well, first of all,
I'm joking.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Here's what's really important. What Witkoff said is not that they're even a week away from a nuclear weapon. It was they're a week away from having enough fuel to make a nuclear weapon, but they've never weaponized. The U.S. intelligence community assesses that in 2003 they shut down any effort to weaponize that program. Which is important because that means you can have fuel, but how do you shrink it down and put it on a warhead, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are much further away from, even in the doomsday scenarios painted by Netanyahu and Witkoff and whomever's saber rattling, like they leave out the fact that Iran does not have an active weapons program. They have a nuclear program that could be concerning. I get it. But anyway, these timelines are all bogus.
The enrichment process is definitely above what is normal for civilian.
What is necessary for a peaceful program.
What is necessary for civilian infrastructure. I see that as not an opportunity for Iran to develop a nuke, which, by the way, you and I probably have differences in opinion on that because I think that we are in the age of nuclear sovereignty, but that's a totally separate conversation that we can have. But I think it's more so a way to try to negotiate with leverage at the negotiation table to get rid of at least some aspects of the sanctions. This was fairly successful. If you don't mind, can you explain to people what the JCPOA is and what the process looked like as someone who was working on it?
Yeah, and it's important because this deal has been so demagogued over the years. But essentially, what the JCPOA was the United States, together with Russia and China and the UK and France and Germany, so all the kind of big powers at the table here with Iran, negotiated a deal in which Iran would agree to never develop a nuclear weapon. They make that commitment, and Trump claimed in the State of the Union that they never made that commitment. They did, but then really importantly, they would destroy the reactor that they were going to use to make plutonium. So they don't need plutonium. They have a uranium enrichment program. And then they would basically take out a significant amount of their centrifuges, put them under lock and key, monitoring and verification, so that they're only running a limited number of centrifuges that cannot produce enough fuel for nuclear weapons at a far lower percent, that's consistent with peaceful purposes. Very importantly, they are shipping their stockpile of enriched uranium out of the country to be reprocessed and then used for things like medical isotopes. And then there are all these inspections regimes. There's people in the can go in and inspect the facilities. Yeah. There's cameras monitoring all this. The shorthand version is Iran gets some sanctions relief, and in exchange, they take a series of steps that guarantee that they do not have a program that could become useful for a nuclear weapon. The stuff is shipped out of the country. There's less of it. There's less of it operating. They're doing less research and development. There's inspections. And this solved, if your genuine interest, right, and this is, I think, what the Obama debate kind of smoked out. If your genuine interest is making sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, this solves that problem for you. Yeah. So if you don't like the deal, you can say it's, I wanted a better deal on the nuclear stuff. No, this is about, and Trump is finding this out now, this is as good a deal as you're going to get on nuclear. It's do you want to remove the Iranian regime? And the Israelis said at the time, they need to get rid of their ballistic missiles too. They need to stop their support for
They're still saying it.
Trump is taking those positions at the negotiating table.
Yeah, which is insane.
And here's the thing. The Iranians will never do that. Yeah. And the Israeli government knows that. And so that proposal is designed in a laboratory to fail. Yeah. And that's kind of where we currently seem to be in these negotiations. And Trump has to decide, am I going to end up in this war because this deal is impossible, or am I going to take kind of essentially like maybe get a slightly better version of the Obama deal and say you did better than Obama and call that a win. I hope he does that. By the way. I'd be happy.
It's also really interesting that their second place prize for like not removing the ballistic missiles has been to limit their range to 300 kilometers. That suspiciously doesn't reach Israel,
but still reaches some of our.
Of course, American bases.
So still reaches American bases in Qatar.
American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and elsewhere are obviously within striking distance. Even the oil refineries are in striking distance of the 300 kilometers, just not Israel. Which is really interesting because that's the one regional partner that, regardless of like proxy wars that Iran has had with other regional powers, that's the one regional power that is almost always directly attacking Iran or has directly attacked Iran in like the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and that's why the Iranian government sees that program as their only potentially, that and the proxy groups were their way in which they tried to defend
of course.
their regime survival. And look, I think that the reason Trump can't explain why we're doing this is it's not even clear to me that he knows why we're doing this. You know what I mean? In the sense that there's a momentum coming up, some of it from Israel and its supporters in the U.S., some of it from kind of dead-ender hawks, like your Lindsey Graham's. I mean, who, yes, is
salivating.
But there are these people in the U.S. that, they hate Iran and Cuba because they've never gotten over 1959 and 1979. There's a kind of vengeance seed in American foreign policy with some of these countries. So I think there is a kind of the convergence of these dead-end Republican hawks, pro-Israel and Israeli government, a little bit of Reza Pahlavi mixed in, right? Like the kind of.
I feel like he's just an irrelevant entity in the conversation. They just dangle him as like as a way to, I guess. There's two components, right? You have the MEK on the one side. With no domestic, with no domestic Iranian support whatsoever, that is completely gone after Iran, Iraq, and then you have Reza Pahlavi for some of the monarchists, who are my neighbors and they're wonderful. Please don't kill me. Anyway,
but I would say one thing about this, if you don't mind. Like, I have a lot of Iranian friends, and the thing is, nobody's defending the Iranian government. The question is, number one, is the U.S. bombing that country the best way to bring about change? And I think the facts show Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, when I was there, that doesn't end well. Even if you think that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, this can help. This could collapse your country and leave the worst people in charge, the most heavily armed hardline people. But the other point I make is that they're making cracks at this regime, like the Women Life Freedom movement. There are women going around uncovered in Iran. Like small changes.
They've actually gotten an ease of a lot of the restrictions with a tremendous amount of on the ground like protests and people have died as a consequence. People have been jailed as a consequence of this. But that's a domestic affair. That's domestic repression, and it doesn't help, like you said.
It doesn't. And the supreme leader is 87 years old and in poor health. Like this thing is going to change. Better to have the Iranian people change it over time than randomly Donald Trump deciding one day, with Bibi Netanyahu, that we're going to bomb this country. Do you really think that their intentions are to set up a stable, successful Iranian democracy? It doesn't feel that way.
No, I mean, but that's also. That has literally never happened.
Yeah.
And you brought up one of those versions, which is, I think, a very scary outcome for every other regional actor, Libya, right? I mean, that's a great example, like Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. American foreign policy is littered with these consequential disasters where obviously the American capital owning class have made a lot of money, whether it be Halliburton in Iraq or whether it be Exxon and Chevron and numerous other oil companies that are now playing a process in the refinement and the procurement. The American population doesn't see any benefits from it. Obviously, my argument always is the morality of it all is like, even if there was some sort of like military Keynesianism and America was able to prop up this wonderful social democracy on the backs of tens of millions of people that we have slaughtered, do I think that is valid or appropriate? Absolutely not. I don't. So, but even in spite of that, in spite of the immorality of it, there is not even any sort of material benefit for the average American. And I think average Americans see that more than ever before. You know, post 9/11, there was a lot of fervor. There was like Americans were looking to issue a consequence to people. They were looking to punish someone, anyone. And in the after like 20 plus years of that, and now, you know, we're on almost we're eventually gonna turn the 30th year of our destabilization initiatives. Americans realize that it hasn't helped them at all. So that's the reason why there's no appetite for this kind of military action in Iran. One of the things that the Trump administration is suggesting that I find very funny is I read this Political report that came out yesterday, and they want Israel to strike Iran first.
Yes.
And then they think this will be easier to sell to the American population.
I think they're wrong about that.
They are so wrong.
I think they're
about
misreading things. You know, because there's a muscle memory in Washington that you know, you will be able to generate broad bipartisan support, you know, if it involves Israel. But we are, you know, through Gaza, through one war in Iran, Bibi Netanyahu, pretty universally loathed by Democrats. The idea that and by the way, it'd be the worst thing for Israel, frankly, you know. If they are seen as starting a war that the United States is then drawn into, that becomes a conflagration.
You might as well make Pat Buchanan the president at that point, because that's that is directly leaning into the argument that like all of the military ambition in this region is not even in America's best interest. It's simply because Israel wants it. Is the main argument from that you're actually seeing in the populist right quite a lot of, and in this iteration of the conflict, there's some truth to that, especially because like I think the divergence with the Obama administration was certainly where we did not act out in Israel's interests, and they certainly reacted negatively to it. And as I explained earlier, this just feeds into that and calcifies that narrative in the eyes of the average Americans, which will lead to never wanting to deal with Israel ever again.
I think one of the things that's interesting, Hasan, is there's so much to say about how overextended we got over 25 years in the war on terror, right? And part of it is the system itself that was constructed kind of created chaos in all these countries, right? Violence and chaos in all these countries. And part of what's hard to unpack is that like it's not like everybody who goes to work for U.S. national security is like, today I'm going to work to create chaos in the world. Operating within a system that allows that to happen, and it's in some cases is meant to make that happen in the sense that we don't, you know, where are we destabilizing countries? Where are we dehumanizing populations, right? It's kind of on this periphery, you know? And now what we've seen, though, is not only have Americans figured out what is the benefit to us in fighting these wars. By the way, what is the cost on our own military that has, you know, suffered a lot because of it? But also, that mindset is coming home. Like Minneapolis looks like Kabul or Baghdad, like with the night patrols, masked people. Like this is literally, if you dehumanize people abroad, particularly black and brown people, like that stuff has now come home.
Sometimes the exact same tools that are being utilized.
No, same equipment. Some of the same techniques, some of the same personnel. Frankly, ICE, I think, when they meet recruiting targets, you know, they look to the
guy who killed Renee Good.
So all this is happening, and I think Americans, to come back to your point, when they look at the Middle East, they're just like, can this place just be? I don't want it to be chaotic. I want things to be kind of calm over there. I don't want to get involved over there.
Yeah.
And then it seems to be the Israeli government policy. If you look at Yemen, and by the way, with the United Arab Emirates, right? So UAE is a part of this too, but the UAE, whether it's the UAE in Sudan and Yemen, Israel and southern Syria, Lebanon, potential Iran conflict. What you're talking about is like just more chaos in this region, right?
Yeah.
And I think Americans would take the opposite view of like, I just want this place to be calm, you know, for their sake and ours, you know, like let's put an end to this. And there's an exhaustion that is part of what makes this ramp up to a potential another war in Iran feel so bizarre and discordant, because it's just not like read the room. This is not what the mood of the country is.
No, not even a little bit. And I do think that depending on Iran's appetite for self-defense, this could go very south. What would you say to my analysis that the Ayatollah is probably one of the more restrained parties involved in this back and forth, judging by past performance, as far as even like reacting to Israel's actions or reacting to American actions, as opposed to some of the more militant elements within the IRGC?
So yeah, this is interesting. So they've been hit twice, like once by Israel and then once by Israel and the United States, and both.
And even before then,
even
the
before
embassy
that,
strike,
or the Qasem Soleimani assassination,
Qasem Soleimani,
the head of the IRGC. And what you saw them do is very carefully calibrate a response so that they could be seen to be responding, but be signaling that they don't escalate. So the example of this is they fired missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar. By all reports, they called ahead and were like, just so you know, we're going to fire these missiles. And I think that was more of a warning than they weren't intending to hit the target. It was like, because they know we can shoot things down, particularly if we have advance notice. It was like, we're trying to show you, like, you are within the range of our missiles, but we're also trying to not escalate this situation.
Yeah.
They did some of the same stuff with some of the drones they flew at Israel, like literally just flying slowly across the Middle East, you know. Now, at the end of the 12-day war, they were starting to try to really hit targets in Israel with their ballistic missiles.
Oh, yeah.
And they started to get through. Now, one of the things that has the ring of truth, I was talking to a really smart analyst named Ali Weiss, is that Israel took out a lot of the Iranian military leadership in the 12-day war, in the last war a few months ago. And some of those are the people that had been arguing, and we got to be careful here. You know, we don't want to react in a way that leads them to remove the regime. So they're essentially, all they care about is regime survival, right? So now those people
I think they also do, like, I'll be fair and say that, like, I can only use my own personal example with Turkey.
Yes.
Right? I despise Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And from what I understand, the government is not a big fan of mine either. I can't go back to Turkey without, you know, possibly going to jail for things that I've written about the Turkish government, things that I've written about the coup. I'm not a good at this by any means. Of course, I've been very critical of that as well. I'm anti-CIA. But having said all of that, I still believe that regardless of how corrupt Erdogan is, regardless of how despotic he is, I still think that his primary, like, there is a level of responsibility that he has to his population, to the sovereignty of the country. Even if that means he makes a lot of money on the side, or, you know, offers favorable contracts to his children and whatnot. And I feel the same way about the Iranian government as well. Like, ultimately, yes, they're ruthless and they're incredibly repressive to a degree that I think yields not only instability and creates national security problems for them. It opens up tremendous opportunities for Israel to very clearly take advantage of. And yet, I do think that their primary focus here is to maintain sovereignty and to protect their citizens to the best of their ability.
Well, and here's another important point about this, because oftentimes American politicians, policymakers, they look at a place like Iran or Cuba for that matter, and they see they call it a regime. They see it as a monolith. Like everybody inside that regime is the exact same person, and that there are. I mean, just because you're not a democracy doesn't mean you don't have people with different views in the government. Yeah. And there are always hardliners and people that are more open to reform or engagement, what have you. What's happening when you bomb a country like this, you are confirming repeatedly, you are confirming the worldview of the hardliners, right?
Yeah.
The people who've been saying all along, don't ever make a deal with the Americans. You shouldn't have even made that deal with Obama. Like, there were a lot of people in the Iranian system who hated the nuclear deal because they're like, don't trust the Americans. By the way,
They might not
then
have been wrong.
when Trump pulls out, guess who looks like they're proved right? The hardliners, right? And so when those Iranian military commanders got taken out, the younger crowd that moved up the ladder, these people could be more, ready for a fight. And this time, Iran might not call ahead. And look, they can fire ballistic missiles at our bases in Qatar and Bahrain. They can fire ballistic missiles at Israel, try to overwhelm the missile defense systems, have a few missiles get through. And just imagine if a bunch of Americans are killed, for instance. Their proxies could, try to attack our embassy in Baghdad, which in the past they've been able to demonstrate they could do that. Lebanon, they could try to stir things up. They could launch cyber attacks. And then the problem is, of course, then there'll be an overwhelming response. And if you remove the regime, if you kill the supreme leader, it's far more likely that Iran implodes into some kind of civil conflict, or the IRGC, the most hardline faction, tries to seize power because they're the most heavily armed people in the country. And then you have separatist movements in parts of Iran.
There's also like a succession that was chosen already, given the Ayatollah Khamenei's age. And I think before the last 12-day war, there was like 3 different clerics that were chosen in secret. So there's like a contingency plan that they have. I don't know how successful that will be, especially because like Khamenei was also a formative figure in the Iran-Iraq war as well. So like he was an established known figure amongst the clerics as well. So I don't know where they would go from here. Like he was not the same force that I guess Khomeini was, but even then he was like an established entity.
And he's the longest serving dictator in the world. So he's kind of built this structure, But the other thing they know is we can bomb, we have all this overwhelming superiority in the air, but he also knows that Americans, including Trump.
Said he's still younger than Chuck Grassley.
He is actually.
True.
And by the way, similarly online, his Twitter account is kind of like Chuck Grassley.
Just like Chuck
Check it
Grassley.
out. Yeah, but they know that we're probably not going to send in ground troops because there's no support in this country for it.
Yeah.
So if they can,
but it's not even just that. It's also like a very difficult. Like it's like a fortress.
It's a huge country.
It's a huge 93 country. Million people. 90 million people. It's like a fortress with the terrain.
Yeah.
It's like Afghanistan times 10.
Yeah.
And recent events show that Afghanistan was not exactly successful.
So that's the thing. If you're the IRGC and you weather, midnight blizzard 2.0, you think, I can wait these guys out. Look what happened with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Look what happened. I mean, Iraq, kind of muddled to some place that is where nobody expected it to be. But, Trump is depending on this idea that you can solve problems just by bombing countries.
Yeah.
Or remove regimes just by bombing countries. And that's never been the end of the story.
Well, I will say there has been, obviously I'm not a fan of Trump by any means. And I've been very critical of his insane military adventurism and destabilization initiatives. But the one thing that Trump has been somewhat shy about, has been somewhat restrained about, is that he also has this weird like anti-neocon tendency almost, where he's like, I don't want to subscribe to a 20-year war. I don't want to be like on the, I want to go in and out clean. Like, and as much as I abhor what the administration did in Venezuela, it's very obvious that there were different forces inside of the administration that would have loved to utilize more military assets and potentially go into a much more long-standing battle, maybe even try to forcibly put Machado in charge. And he was like, no, she has no popular base. It's not going to happen. We're going to work with Delcy Rodriguez. So in a weird way, like, I think that approach is different from like boomer neocons of the past.
It is.
And it shows me that even with Qasem Soleimani, he will do unpredictable things and he will greatly escalate conflict, but he doesn't want to have, this is not sane-washing chatter, establish like a logical through line with the way he, with what he has done and what he chooses not to do. He takes risks, but he also doesn't want to engage militarily for an extended period of time.
So can I give you an analogy? Which, again, I want to apologize in advance. When you're talking about war, like it's always hard to make these kinds of analogies, but I actually think this one does get into his mindset. He is like a gambler that thinks he can walk away from the table.
Yeah.
And so he'll go and he'll place a big bet, and then it'll hit and he'll cash it in, right? And the problem is one of those bets you're going to lose, right? Like one of those bets, the Iranian regime is going to hit a U.S. base, and then what do you do?
Or a ship.
Or a ship, right?
Like they're talking about using Chinese radar systems. They're talking about potentially shipments of Chinese anti-ship missiles.
Yeah.
Like this is, and even before that, they have a fairly sophisticated and very affordable indigenous weapons manufacturing industry that is specifically designed around fighting against America and Israel.
Yeah.
You know, underground missile silos and the like, and underground missile launching systems as well.
Production facilities.
Yeah, exactly. So like there is not
supply chains. Yeah.
This is a sovereign state. This is not waging war, like waging a counterinsurgency war against like a band of brigands using old equipment that we gave them, 20 years prior.
Well, and Venezuela had not been preparing for 40 years for a potential conflict with the United States.
Yeah.
Like the Iranian, their entire military and security ethos has been designed with the U.S. this precise conflict in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Same with North Korea. Like, let's be real. Their initial artillery systems that they designed was like obviously a threat. And then beyond that, like their nuclear program and the intercontinental ballistic missiles program that they developed was developed specifically with this in mind. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I was fascinated by this. A lot of the tunnel systems they learned from DPRK engineers is what there was something I was reading about this. Like,
no, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of cross pollination. I mean, a lot of those Iranian say drones were used by Russia in the Ukraine war, and the North Koreans are in Russia. Like, there's a lot more collaboration, and frankly, we've been one of the driving forces of it.
Oh, for sure.
I would say, especially with Iran. Well, by the way, it is a failure of American foreign policy. Consider these governments, right? The Kim dynasty in North Korea, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Chinese Communist Party, and the kind of Christian nationalist, Russian empire of Putin. Those are not ideologically similar regimes.
They're anti-imperialist,
they're
though,
basically
from their
just
perspective.
pushed together by necessity in a lot of ways. When we should have, and this is what Obama was trying to do, to pursue diplomacy to kind of break that apart and see can we bring people into different structures, and can we create a different mode of politics in the world?
I think it was Jeff Stein's reporting in the Washington Post that was really fascinating on this, where he talked about the sanctions regime that we have implemented around the world, and what consequences that has created, which is like it forced a alternative market. It forced a secondary market of cooperation for a lot of countries, especially in the periphery, because we have, I think, sanctioned 69% of the poorest countries on the planet at some point. And it's a very simple process. You go to the Treasury, you say, I want this guy out, or I want this regime out. I want this competing interest in the country that I want to be involved in, to get starved out by the power of the American government.
And it's by the same authority that the Supreme Court just struck down on tariffs, right? And so the Supreme Court is fine with presidents just sanctioning everything they want. The tariffs for the Republican majority was, an affront to kind of their free market ethos. I always say to people, look at the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world by the United States. It's Iran, North Korea, Cuba, now Russia, Venezuela. Did that work to achieve the stated aims? Like, sanctions don't work in changing the behavior of governments, number one. Second, they end up hurting the people of those countries, not the elites, right? Because if you get a secondary economy, a black market economy, the IRGC and Iran are the ones that are going to run that economy. Yeah. Right? So they're able, when people would yell at us that you're giving sanctions relief to the IRGC, it's like, no, we're trying to give sanctions relief to the Iranian people that have been fucked by our sanctions. The IRGC has been able to make money in all kinds of black market trade during the sanctions regime. And so what the sanctions end up doing is again, kind of creating this chaos, creating these humanitarian crises. And then now it's become so extreme that these countries are creating parallel economies, right? Yeah. Russia has figured out a way to sell its oil despite being sanctioned by the United States.
Yeah.
The Chinese are trying to turn that into an alternative to the dollar, right?
Yeah.
But the dollar is the basis of American power in the world. If every financial transaction has to run through the dollar,
Yeah.
you have infinite leverage. But if we've sanctioned countries so much and have behaved so recklessly with tariffs and other things, that enough critical mass of other countries are like, that's it. We're not trading in this. We're not. Then America becomes a normal country real fast.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that because like I think we saw a version of this with like China posturing with like the nuclear option in trade when they added additional export protections on export controls on rare minerals, right?
Yeah.
And these are rare minerals that are necessary for production in the military-industrial complex. Like this is a matter of national
Or
security.
your car radio, your computer in your car is not
Yeah,
gonna work
exactly.
like that.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything is at some point like manufactured. A component is manufactured in China, and that was obviously posturing. It was a trade posture to show how much power they have at their disposal. But if they were to apply that in the same unstable ways that Donald Trump has been, engaging in these like tariff wars and whatnot, obviously everyone would look for a secondary market instantly.
Yeah.
And I think in some respects, like what we did with SWIFT after Russia's irredentist action in Ukraine, unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, caused this moment of panic for a lot of other countries where they were like, oh, America will actually blow this entire thing up, even if it causes them harm in the long run as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And that I think accelerated the secondary market, or like these points of leverage that other nations in the periphery were looking for, like the BRICS alliance and whatnot that's put together.
I'll give you one example of that, which is India was buying Russian oil.
Yeah.
And Biden kind of told them, hey, we'll look the other way because India, you're a big important country. And by the way, they don't have time. They can't recalibrate their entire energy market that fast to comply with sanctions. Fast forward to Trump. When Modi didn't go along with giving Trump credit for the end of the brief India-Pakistan conflict over Kashmir, because that was not true. like Trump did not broker. Pakistan nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. Modi refused to. Trump sanctioned India, or is it tariffs? He tariffed, and so Trump tariffed India and also got the EU to sanction India. Guess what Modi did a few weeks later? He went to Beijing for a gigantic celebration of, I forget what anniversary it was. He's saying, I have options, people. Like, if you're going to, I have a country of 1.2 billion people. I'm not a Modi fan, but to your point, I do think he also has to act, consistent with Indian sovereignty. He's like, if you're going to keep fucking with me like this, and I can wake up one morning to find that the tariffs are 50%, or my power grid is out because of some sanction that just got put in place, I'm going to go deal with these people over here.
Oh yeah. And that is what more and more countries are doing. Even Western allies that have been vassalized over the course of the post-World War II New World Order, that played a formative role in the Cold War as like reliable allies to America, have now come to that recognition in the aftermath of the Greenland posturing.
Yeah.
That caused, Mark Carney's famous speech at was it Davos? At Davos to be like, we need middle powers to rise up and develop our own sovereignty. Now, I don't know how far they will go. I'm sure, like, if Trump says you're going to be a part of the Golden Dome, Mark Carney's probably going to say yes to that. And the same goes for not violating the embargo that was added on to Cuba. Like, Canada could easily send oil to Cuba. And they could probably send oil to Cuba with much more ease than like Mexico can, for example. And if they were truly about that lifestyle, I think they would do that. They would be like, no, this is unjustifiable. We are going to send oil against American sanctions to help other countries also come to terms with that, because the embargo on Cuba has been roundly condemned by the entire world since its inception, pretty much. I mean, with the exception of two countries, Israel and America, everyone's routinely demanding America end the sanctions, and yet they don't. But clearly, these other middle powers are not doing anything against it. They're sending aid, and that's good.
Mexico
That's great.
is in particular,
Yeah, Mexico's sending aid as well, but like, a part of the Venezuela scheme was to stop oil transfers
Yes.
to the island.
To starve Cuba.
Yeah, to directly and deliberately starve Cuba. How much of that do you think is like the ideological neocon component from the likes of, you know, Marco Rubio and the resentment that they feel, or wanting to punish this island for its sovereignty, for being like this dangerous predicament for America, that like a communist country could thrive 90 miles off the coastline of the United States? Like, is that, how much of that is ideological? How much of that is like material, I guess?
It's ideological in this one. And
Yeah.
you know, the quick backstory, I negotiated in secret with Alejandro Castro, Raul's son, Fidel's nephew, in Canada. They hosted the secret talks, because they were really supportive of getting rid of the embargo. For a year and a half, we normalized relations, but the legislative embargo is still in place, right? And so we basically opened everything up that you could, you know, through executive action, where you're basically licensing all this, you know, activity. You licensing travel. Americans are allowed to travel to Cuba now. We're not going to punish you for that. It's crazy that Americans are told you can't travel 90 miles away.
By the way, I've talked to Cubans, and they say that was like a unprecedented prosperity for the island, where they felt for the first time ever that like people could survive without having to leave.
Well, here's why Marco Rubio is full of shit. It's because they always say they want to help the Cuban people. The Cuban government had created a private sector where people could own small businesses. And that was basically restaurants, stores, taxis.
Yeah.
And so when Americans started traveling there in huge numbers after the Obama opening, they're making money. Like their lives are getting better. And then it's when Trump comes in and Rubio's in his ear that he slams that door shut. Now that is about a couple of things. That is about, in part, South Florida Cuban exile politics, which is about, like, you know, settling the score, you know. And yes, the Cuban government has done some very bad things, including to a lot of the people who left, had family members who were killed. But, you know, their property is confiscated. But look, there's a lot we can unpack in that history. I know. I'll give you the example. My first meeting with Alejandro, he goes through a bill of goods for like an hour and a half, and the negotiating partner is like, "You're going to be ready for this," but all the bill of goods were things that happened. You know, like, you guys did the Bay of Pigs invasion. You guys tried to assassinate Fidel Castro X number of times.
638 times.
You know, Posada Carriles, this guy, if you want to Google something interesting, Posada Carriles, the CIA asset, shot down a Cuban passenger airliner. Like, there are all these things, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember. Yeah.
But anyway, to answer your question, part of this is just a pathology of there's a certain kind of South Florida politics, and politicians like Marco Rubio, Bob Menendez, so it's bipartisan. We're basically, Bob Menendez,
Some of our least corrupt politicians.
yeah, you know, Gold Bar's Bob Menendez said he was for democracy in Cuba, and he would do things like he would block the approval of any ambassador. You know, if you tried to change Cuba policy, and you'd have to kind of like steamroll the guy in your own party, right? We had to do that multiple times.
Yeah.
So some of this is just is diaspora politics, and then some of it is, like I was saying, there is this kind of psychology, like the Cubans beat us. Like in '59, they ousted our guy Batista. This used to be kind of our playground, and all of a sudden it moved to the left. Then they're on the other side of the Cold War. They stuck their thumb in our eye again and again and again. And there are people. This is like the Lindsey Graham. He's not a Cuban. But he has this pathology.
He's never seen a war that he hasn't liked.
Yeah, because look, here's the thing about Cuba. It poses no threat to the United States.
No,
like I can argue the threat Iran might pose. You know.
Yeah.
The funny thing is with Cuba, they're negotiating, but nobody even knows what they're negotiating, right? With Iran, there's something to negotiate, like your nuclear program. Cuba, it poses, and if you've been there, it is in a level of poverty that does not exist in the Americas and barely exists in the world, and it is largely because of our embargo. They don't like to drive classic cars.
Camila Cabello is going to get very offended that you said that. They're going to do standpoint epistemology on you.
Well, let me just give you an example of this. We were trying to encourage investment after the Obama opening from Europe, because we couldn't even get it from the U.S.
Yeah.
And the Europeans were like, we don't trust that we can invest there without getting sanctioned by you. And you, Obama, you're not going to be around forever. And so the embargo puts a total freeze on investment into Cuba. Guess what that does? It fossilizes the Cuban government. It makes them the only alternative. If no ideas, no investment, no travelers can get in the country, how can the place change? And so American policy has not only failed against its stated objective of changing the Cuban regime, it's actually been a huge ally in kind of fossilizing the status quo in Cuba.
Yeah.
And now we're literally trying to starve this place to death. And the fact that there's no discussion around the malnutrition in Cuba, like the unnecessary deaths that could happen, the kind of collective punishment as policy, that is so normalized that you don't see any discussion of it in like mainstream media. It's just like, you know, will Trump get a win in Cuba? If the win is starving a bunch of people to death, what are you really winning, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're 100% right. Cuba presents zero threat to America. It's not, I mean,
it's not trying to attack us. You know?
We have a fucking concentration camp that we on like a lease agreement from Cuba. Like that's where Guantanamo Bay is.
Well, I had it. You like this, Hasan, as an anecdote. Like, so the Cubans hate that, and every year, famously, there's an agreement signed back in the kind of colonial days where we pay like $1,000 a month or a year for that. Fidel used to never cash the checks and like stack them up and stuff. But at the end of the Obama administration, when it was evident he was not going to be able to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, I went to the Cubans and I was like, "Hey, I just want to know if I can make this pitch to my boss. If we gave you guys Guantanamo back, would you keep the people that the United States wants to keep in prison? They're like, sure, we know how to keep people in prison, you know? So I went to Obama and I was like, you know, because there are people down there like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was responsible for 9/11. But so I was like, this is the only way to close the prison. The only way to close the prison is to give the whole facility back to the Cubans. And obviously that didn't fly, but that's a good example. Why do we have a naval base in a country that doesn't want us there? You know, I mean, like if we're acting in,
it's a sequence of contradictions that make no sense when you scratch the surface of it. Where you're like, none of this is 90 miles off the coastline. It's so ridiculous. It's so cruel. It's so inhumane. And it's just like all of this theatrics is like kept together by the average American's lack of interest and lack of understanding of how these things work. And I do think that is, to some respects, by design, because if Americans were more focused on foreign policy, I think, especially if they understood the impact of foreign policy on the domestic policy, whether it be the Imperial boomerang, as we were talking about earlier, or like all of the funds that are going to building bombs, they could be spent here on our roads, on our healthcare, on our facilities, on our education. I think a lot more Americans would be very frustrated that we keep people at bay by refusing to let them imagine an alternative and to constantly keep them in fear in this like panic state where we have to destroy our enemies. They always want to get us. They want to get us because they're not us.
Can I give you a specific example? Is Cuba, right? So there's literally a legislative travel ban, right, that says that Americans can't travel to Cuba. We had to essentially make it so we're not going to enforce that. We said you could travel to Cuba to have people-to-people exchanges, which basically meant if you talk to Cubans, you could travel to Cuba. Every American I know, and I know a lot of Americans who went to Cuba, go down there and they're like, what the fuck? Like, what has our government done down here? Like, why are these people so poor? They're, you know, and then guess what? The first thing Trump does is he shuts off that people-to-people travel. Like, they don't want you to see it. I mean, some of your viewers have probably been to Cuba. If you've been to Cuba, you understand it's something about American foreign policy that you can't understand just sitting at home here. You know, you see what sanctions at that scale can do to a people. And I don't know anybody who goes.
And you also
there.
see the people. You're like, these are not enemies. Like, these are not my enemies.
Yeah.
These are just like regular people who are very kind people. And
some of them hate the government. Some like the government, right?
Yeah.
But you can't, like Marco Rubio, for instance, he's never been to Cuba. You know, I mean, he comes from a Cuban family, but he's never set foot on the island. I mean, if you have to go there and look at, I mean, I'm not hopeful that he would change his mind, but a lot of this is kept out of sight from people, you know, because if they saw it, they wouldn't like it.
Yeah, there's, I mean, I've had a similar experience of this, like visiting China. I mean, I obviously had like in comparison to the average American foreign policy person, I was, an outright sympathizer in comparison to them. But I also had my worries before I traveled to China. But seeing a government be able to develop itself and achieve sovereignty and go through the process of like their own historic struggle and get to a point where they are a force to be reckoned with, like a global superpower at this point. I think that's part of what America fears ultimately. Like they don't want Cuba to be a normal country, but then also be communist at the same time, because then there's the threat of that alternative right at our doorstep. In the same way that I think the USSR, no matter how fearful Europeans were of the USSR, there were certain aspects of USSR existence that I think played a role in pushing Europe towards social democracy in ways that like we never had, we never experienced.
Yeah, they had communist parties, and
Yeah.
so they had to do things like free healthcare to defang the communist parties. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that is like that's the ultimate fear of the capital owning class in general, where they're like, we have a really good thing going, and we don't want to give up on that, except.
but it's
in the
collapsing.
absence,
It's collapsing.
exactly. In the absence of that friction, in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR, you see, without the threat of an alternative, how much capital has dominated even Europe. European social democracy is on the brink of collapse. And what's happening as a consequence of that is the rise of fascism.
Yeah.
As it once did when liberalism was attempted 100 years ago, and it was also collapsing, and it was early, right? It was a new thing. Nation states were just being developed and not even really developed at all. And through that process, fascism came as a force of stability.
Yeah.
A force of stability that capital owners aligned with.
Yeah.
That's why titans of industry in both Nazi Germany and in Mussolini's Italy were very much aligned with the fascist movements, because they were more fearful of the communists. And the communists were plenty at that time. They were a force to be reckoned with. So I think one of the things that I stress all the time, because there will be people that will be critical of me even having a conversation with you in my community, regardless of your worldview, be far outside of like the blob, as you call it.
I'm in this place where I'm like, those people think I'm super radical, and some friends think I'm super like not.
Well, those people think I'm a terrorist.
Yeah,
so
yeah. So I'm like stuck in this like in between space.
Yeah.
But I'm moving.
But from my perspective, it's like the alternative to that is not business as usual liberalism. The alternative to that is not like NATO Atlanticism necessarily, but the alternative to that is a class-based movement.
Is a solidarity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like understanding that the working class individual in Cuba has the same exact interests as the working class individual living in West Virginia. They want a roof over their heads. They want to be able to feed their children. They want to feed themselves, and they want to have some meaning in their lives, and that's it. There's no like evilness component in our foreign adversaries. Same goes for people living in Iran, people living in Yemen, people living in countries that we've declared foreign adversaries. Like they have the same exact interest that we do. And I feel like that's completely lost in American politics.
I think that's right. And I think one way to think about the challenge in the world today is we always look at these kind of older ideological paradigms, but essentially we are living through an unprecedented consolidation of power, right? And it's essentially in this country, like so much of the wealth and technologies that drive our lives are in so few hands. But if you look around the world, like what did Trump do? Like if you look at his corruption, the Emirati one is like a very good example of this. So first of all, the Abraham Accords are worth bringing into this. So the Abraham Accords happened. Emiratis are the main country normalizing relations with Israel. Bahrain comes with them. It's framed. Morocco comes with them. It's framed as a peace deal. These countries were not at war,
Yeah.
Now, what happens? Well, you get all of a sudden kind of this, the kind of mega rich in the Emirates. They're getting like surveillance technology from Israel. Israel's got, a friend, in the heart of the Arab world. The Emirates also gets like now everybody loves them in Washington because they did the Abraham Accords. So then they can do things like what they're doing in Sudan, thinking that they're not going to be held to account. But then if you look after Trump's election, the Emirates, an Emirati buys a 49% stake in World Liberty Financial, right? That's Trump's crypto business.
Yeah.
Then they make a $2 billion investment through Trump Coin.
Nothing to see here.
Right.
Seems totally above board.
Then Trump lifts the restrictions on the highest level U.S. chips going into the Emirates. Why do I tell this kind of story? Because what unites Trump and tech oligarchs and Emiratis and Netanyahu, and by the way, in their own way, Putin and Erdogan, is they're all grabbing their piece of this while people are just getting screwed. And so I'm not limiting this to a Western criticism. I think the Chinese Communist Party is doing this too. Like they're in charge of the AI monopoly in China. And there are huge majorities of people around the world who are like, why is power just being taken, like it's being like just drained out from us and given to just a very small number of people at the top who are either political elites, technology elites, or kind of financial capitalist elites, right? What you need is a solidarity movement across borders that is just going to start dismantling that apparatus, or else like that's going to lead either to, they'd be happy to have a series of wars. They're going to be fine. They're going to, their technologies are going to be used to fight the wars. Or if you're Putin, you've got your DACA you can go to. There's such a gap between the people who feel the consequences of what's happening in the world and the people that are driving those consequences. And I think that's the imbalance. It feels like it's getting less sustainable to me. And you see like AOC and Bernie giving voice to this, like the authoritarianism problem is.
I don't even think they're radical enough. I'll be honest. I love them, but I think like the ways in which they should be communicating this is like unapologetic, the language of class warfare, because I think like a lot of Americans
You
are
don't think
fearful.
Bernie does that?
I mean, even Bernie dilutes his message quite a bit, although he has such a long history of doing exactly that it's a little bit different. But I do think that, I mean, Euro-communism and socialism in America is a very like liberalized version as opposed to like the Marxist-Leninist tradition.
Socialism in America is European social democracy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's free healthcare. Zoran's agenda is very familiar to anyone who lives in most European countries.
Absolutely. And
free childcare, free healthcare. Like this is
a modest expansion of existing social safety nets is seen as this like radical
Zoran
change.
is far from a communist.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's like
he's not seizing the means of production.
But even then, like even if someone is, because I think Bernie is a socialist. Like he comes from the socialist tradition for sure. Notwithstanding his like latest mishaps every now and then, but I mean like he has
Eugene
a
Debs,
consistent he has a consistent
Labor.
socialist message for his entire career, and has been at odds with American foreign policy at times when it mattered. I think like post Yugoslavia, it's a little bit different. Like if I look at his career as critically as possible, I think there has been, still consistent advocacy against like American foreign policy at times. But he presents himself as a social democrat is what I'm trying to say. I think obviously no Democrat's going to run around advocating to develop a Marxist-Leninist vanguard in the United States of America. And that's not my expectation either. But I think like as far as the language that we use, I do think that a lot of Democrats do shy away from like saying anything that can be immediately criticized as like you're a communist, you love the USSR, you love America's foreign adversaries. I think like just as Bernie played a big role in normalizing socialism as an ideology in America and like combating a century of Red Scare propaganda and did so effectively, I think we can push even past that. Like we can push further from the position that we're currently in with the language that we use. Because otherwise you run into, and I want to hear about your perspective on this, at the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
AOC delivered a speech. Now, it's not, I understand what she was saying. I understand where she was going with said speech. And I do think that there are some disagreements that I have with Matt Duss, some areas of tremendous agreement that I have with Matt Duss, especially with respect to his approach to China. I think like their attitude to China is very good from my perspective, where they think like no more strategic competition with China. Like they are a partner and we should treat them as a partner.
And we should negettate things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, rather than, saber rattling and the posturing that we engage in. But as far as like hearkening back to almost like a NATO Atlanticist position, I do think that they find themselves in between these two forces where I'm still running a little scared on foreign policy, where they don't want to just say like, we should only care about class here. Like, and it almost goes back to like vulgar Brandonism, as I like to call it, going back to like the Biden era of like a restoration of the liberal rule-based order.
Yeah.
Pre-October 7, of course.
I was in Munich, and what was interesting to me about that is, look, I think that the message that she was delivering that I think was important is that they're dealing with the rise of these fascist parties, these far-right parties across Europe.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the kind of social democrat class that is kind of the governing class, or the Christian Democrat, that kind of center right to center left. Yeah. They're kind of bystanders, and they're like, do we? Maybe we should just get harder on immigration, to
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Shouts out to Hillary Clinton.
If you're a voter in Europe and you want a hard ass on immigration, like you have the people that will, like Viktor Orbán's of the world, who would do that. And so what she's saying is like, if you guys want to be serious about tackling the far right, it's not about talking up democracy or attacking this way. It's about dealing with the issues that your working class is facing. That the democracy crisis in Europe is a working class crisis. Now, the split screen problem with that in Munich was they were all also talking about, and this was not AOC so much as a lot of the kind of security people, how great it is that Europe is now going to spend all this money on defense, because Donald Trump has bullied them into spending 5% of their GDP on defense. And it's 3.5% of GDP plus, they say 1.5 for logistics or something. Yeah. But an insane amount of money on defense, which, by the way, I don't believe that they're actually going to do. But that is a recipe for helping the far right, because that's that like.
How do you do that?
Plowing money into defense. Austerity. Yeah, exactly. You're not even doing job create. You're plowing money into like defense technologies and stuff, right? So like, at the same time that you're like, oh yes, we must deal with the working class, you're having austerity to pay for your huge defense budgets that feel totally divorced from what it feels like. They're where we were at the beginning of the Biden presidency in some respects, where it's like, are they going to wake up and realize that the recipe is not just singing from the greatest hits album of the rules-based order and talking about democracy and talking about the danger of the far right? You have to show working class people that you're like meeting them where they are. And that includes breaking from orthodoxy on some issues where you're expected to kind of go along with the Trump bullying you on defense spending. Pedro Sanchez in Spain is the one leader who basically told Trump to pound sand. He's like, I'm not spending that much on defense. I think they spend like 1.something%. And his numbers went up. Yeah. And he's been governing Spain for 10 years. He's a socialist. He on Gaza, he's in a different place from most of Europe. On immigration,
there are still limitations, unfortunately, to like what they can do.
He may not be where you are, but like.
Oh no! I just meant like there are like when you're in the EU, there are severe restrictions on like how far you can go. I mean, Ireland is another great example of this. Like, these are countries that have been on the right side of history for a very long time, and there's limitations of what they can and can't do, unfortunately.
But I think if you look at Sanchez, for instance, he's doing the things that we're talking about in the sense that he's pursuing socialist policies. He's not caving on immigration. He's taking a stand on Gaza. He's not spending money in defense.
Yeah, shouts out to the king.
He keeps getting rewarded for it. He's been in power 10 years. Now he'll lose at some point, but he's had a 10-year run there. And so I think that I see your point on AOC. Look, she's there to kind of begin to get her reps on the world stage. That's what it felt like to me. Is this is a person that has ambitions that go beyond being in Congress, maybe run for president, and I'm going to kind of take my message at home to this place. I will say what was interesting to me being there is all the coverage was like tisk tisk on her Taiwan answer. People, every young person there wanted to be in the room with AOC in Europe.
Yeah.
Like she has a
Also-
star power that no American politician has outside
Also,
this
her
country.
Taiwan answer is because of our policy. Our longstanding policy
It
in
makes no
Taiwan
sense. Yeah,
is
yeah.
called strategic ambiguity, which is another word for lying.
For,
which is,
we're not going to tell you. It's a
Yeah.
word for we're not going to tell you.
yeah, it's like, oh no, you're one China, totally. Taiwan, like, because in the American government, you're in the American government. Taiwan is a part of China in the American government's like official language.
That's our agreement with China
Yes.
from 1979.
Yeah. Shouts out to the great Maoist Richard Nixon and the other great Maoist Henry Kissinger. The only good thing that they did probably, which was the recognition of the People's Republic of China. But they did well that, and also I guess EPA. Nixon was an interesting character. I mean, he's horrible.
Here's
But,
I mean, I don't know if you want to go into Taiwan. Do you want to do the little Taiwan or?
oh, we can talk about Taiwan.
So what I find complicated about Taiwan is this: is that, and look, I don't want to fight a war. You know, like the goal of the policy should be no war over Taiwan. And I'll get to kind of one way you might do that. But when we made that deal, the people running Taiwan believed that there was one China, right? So Chiang Kai-shek leaves China with a couple million people.
All the gold.
Takes over all the gold, takes over Taiwan, is a brutal U.S.-backed authoritarian leader who believed that they're the legitimate government in exile in Taipei. And so they didn't object necessarily to the idea of one China. Now, the DPP that currently governs Taiwan, they were the opposition movement that overturned the authoritarian system. And they're like, we're not Chinese. Like, Chiang Kai-shek is the one who came here and said, we're all Chinese.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of sympathy for younger people I know in Taiwan who are like, there are all these deals that have been made over our heads. Our ancestors have been living here for hundreds of years. It was only Chiang Kai-shek who came here and said, we're all China. I'm not suggesting that that means you abrogate the one China policy. I think what you want to try to put this, you want to, and sometimes the best thing you do in foreign policy is just try to push off like a problem. Like, let's get into some negotiations here. Let's start talking about this. Like, instead of just threatening each other teeth and kind of building up to some climax where the Chinese might try to invade or blockade Taiwan and will the United States come to the rescue, why aren't we doing more to try to avoid that outcome diplomatically? You know,
Well, I think the real reason is because, and maybe this is where you and I diverge, but like, I think it is in. I mean, I think it was Mao who said it, where he was like, "There's two islands of empire, like Western imperialism in the Far East is Taiwan, and in the Near East it's Israel." And I feel like it's like a base of operations for America to constantly have this like potential destabilization force, notwithstanding like the actual will of the population. Because let's be real, I don't think America really cares about it that much. I think it's good for arguments. You can always use it as
Americans
a good...
care about the semiconductor.
They care about the semiconductor industry, and they more so just care about like having something on the thorn of China, this like behemoth that has exploded in size and in prowess around the globe. So, as far as like Taiwan goes, I mean, I look at their public approvals fairly closely, and their attitude always is we like having one foot in China and one foot in the Western world.
That's right.
And they don't want to break the status quo.
They actually don't want to be independent and have a U.S. military base there. They like the status quo.
Yeah, because it's very beneficial for them when you get to, because I have Taiwanese relatives.
Yeah.
And some of them live here. One of them is married to my uncle Cenk Uyghur.
What do they want the outcome of this whole thing to be?
They feel a sense of pride because like of China's prosperity, but they don't at least one of them does not like the Chinese government. But they still feel this like sense of Chinese prosperity. It's very interesting.
Look
phenomenon.
what we built.
Yeah. Because it's like, because it is pretty hard, especially when you go there and you're like, what the fuck? Like these guys were able to
Shanghai,
build.
it's like,
You're like,
shit.
this is crazy. I mean, the hotel I stayed in was like a barren wasteland 20 years ago, and now there's like towering skyscrapers everywhere. And then with my other relative, I mean, he works in China. He works in Shenzhen, right? So he's like, he's living in China, right? Mainland China. So it's. They see it as like they're not like as hardline as Americans present it, and there are certainly a lot of people from Taiwan here that are hardliners, definitely, and that happens. Like the diaspora population usually has that, but at the end of the day, they're Han Chinese, and they see that, and they see that as like a united a point of prosperity.
But I want to just come back to the AOC point, because it's the goal for the test of these people should not be whether you can stand up at a conference with a bunch of elites and recite a formula that is the right answer on Taiwan.
Yeah.
The goal is to have a worldview that makes sense to people, you know? And so she gets all this shit for not pivoting immediately to like, we have a policy of strategic ambiguity and, but that's the wrong end. Like, why is the test of becoming president your capacity to kind of recite words that have no meaning to most people? And this is a problem I have with national security, and I'm trying to demystify it and how I try to talk about it. I'm not saying I get that right all the time, but it is designed to exclude people. Like the language of it makes no sense to people. It's all these acronyms, or it's like the meetings that we had full and frank conversations about the full range of bilateral issues, and they're not actually telling you the truth, right? And I think part of what we need to do is just change the language, you know, and talk to people. Why can't we just have a serious conversation, like this kind of conversation where it's like, this is a real fucking problem, man, because the Chinese are not going to let this go. Like this, they see this as part of their territory. They see it as indistinguishable from Tibet or Hong Kong. That's what the U.S. has agreed to. We have a one China policy. There's some people here though who like are really nervous about what that means for them, because they kind of like that they have freedoms in Taiwan that they don't have in China. So what do we do about that? Like, why can't we just name these things and talk about them instead of retreating behind these kind of carefully drafted, you know, formulas that have been, it's like the two-state solution, you know, I believe in two states side by side living in peace and security. That language has no relevance in the physical universe. You know, like it's just something that politicians say to avoid having to actually tell you what they think about what's happening in the West
absolutely.
Bank, you know?
But that's precisely the reason why they do that.
Yeah.
They do that to obfuscate from the truth. They do that to not have these critical conversations. And I think in many instances, I mean, look, I talk to a lot of politicians. I talk to a lot of consultants and analysts. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of them haven't really thought about it.
Yeah.
Like they just haven't. It's much easier for them to just like repeat whatever like this preconceived talking point is, because if they were to expend a great deal of time learning about it, reading the history and developing like a truly coherent worldview around like what must be done in these places, I think all of a sudden you're putting yourself at odds with like the rest of the country, because the rest of the country doesn't give a shit. And sometimes are very antagonistic towards your worldview. I see that all the time from my perspective on American foreign policy.
But most Americans are like, you know, they want to believe the good story, right? They want to believe there were sanctioning countries to help them. Like if there was more information, you know, I think you might get different outcomes. Because in Iraq, they had good information because they had relatives fighting in that war who were coming home being like, this is a fucking shit show, you know?
Yeah.
Now, I think there are a couple things though about the incentive structures for people in these jobs. One is jobs. So I can tell you, and I'm not saying this to toot my horn, it's just the reality of who I was. I left the Obama administration because I negotiated the normalization relations with Cuba, and because I'd been kind of the front man for the JCPOA with Iran. I had made a bunch of enemies.
Wait, really? Interesting. Yeah, I feel like we share a lot of enemies.
I mean, I had Black Cube, Mossad people spying on me. That's the whole story. But essentially, then I started my podcast, and I had to deprogram a little bit because I was talking like I used to talk in government, you know, and then I was like, but then to talk honestly about, say, Israel, Palestine, or Cuba is to ensure that you're not going to be confirmed to a job in a future administration. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people that just self-censor because they're like, it's not worth, if I make these enemies, my career is cooked. Then the other problem that you put your finger on that is so, so important is it is amazing, given the awesome power that the United States has in the world, how little people in positions of power interact with people in these countries. I mean, I have Afghan friends who rightly, like, you know, beat the shit out of me when I left government because they're like, we could have told you were backing the wrong people in Afghanistan. They're like, we hate the Taliban, but we fucking hate all these corrupt warlords that you were backing, who were the same people that were repressing us when the Taliban wasn't in power.
Yeah.
And I said to them honestly, I was like, you know what? In all the meetings I was in the Situation Room about Afghanistan, there was never an Afghan in the room. This is a bunch of us, like talking about a country that most of us had never really been to, right? And so there needs to be much more of a feedback loop. If you are hearing from and I tried to do this when I was in government. I certainly did this on Cuba. If you're hearing from people from these actual places, like you get a perspective that you're never going to get at a think tank in Washington.
Yeah.
Where it's all about how can I make the same talking points sound a little smarter, in my paper than the last one. And it's not informed by the views of the countries that we are actually operating in.
Yeah, no, it's mind-boggling, like how sheltered like the average American foreign policy person is. Like they get all the reading in a one-directional way in some of these best institutions that are, I think, specifically teaching them this stuff so they can go and work at the same think tanks that also are churning out the same policy papers over and over again. And that creates this like very weird self-reinforcing propaganda apparatus that traps a lot of politicians, with the exception of like what we would maybe even consider like cranks. And I have a lot of love for people like that. I wouldn't even say that Mike Ravel's a crank, right? I don't think he's a crank, but like he came across as one because of his like consistent advocacy against like American foreign policy, right? Like we used to have that. That was a tradition in American Congress.
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially in the age of like domestic polarization, where basically like if you live in a rural area, if you live in the suburbs, you're more likely to vote Republican. If you live in a city, you're more likely to vote Democrat. And that polarization is like completely set in, where everybody has a party line and they don't even get punished for working against the interests of their constituents as long as they're like, in line with the rest of the party. We don't really have independent thinkers any longer, or people who like genuinely make certain causes their life's mission.
Yeah.
Even though you do every now and then have a guy like Tim Kaine, who is like consistent on some of these issues, and you're like, why the fuck is Tim Kaine one of the main voices saying we mustn't go to war with Iran?
That's interesting though, because Tim Kaine's one good example, and then there are other ones on Cuba. But on Tim Kaine, I'd say I met Tim Kaine when I was working in the Obama campaign, and he was just I think he ran for Senate around that time. Right away he had this view that the president should not be able to go to war without authorization from Congress. And he's been absolutely consistent on it. It doesn't matter what the war is. It doesn't matter if the president is Obama or Trump or Biden. Like, he's on it. And we need more people like that. I think if you're in Congress, it's important you don't need to be an expert on every issue. I'd actually much rather you just become the person that really fucking cares about this thing or that. Like on Cuba, when we did the opening, Barbara Lee had deep connections in Cuba. Karen Bass, who is the mayor here, got in hot water actually when she was being vetted for VP because she spent so much time in Cuba in the 70s. Jim McGovern, another guy who can get called a crank sometimes. But these people had deep relationships in Cuba, and they knew the harm that had been done there. And and when I talked to them, it was like so wildly a different perspective than I'd get from someone who is a foreign policy expert in Congress, who's just like, well, the Cuban government is bad for these reasons, and maybe we tweak the policy this way, but God forbid, we think about actually changing it. And so I think you do need those people that are willing to kind of really burrow in on these things and become advocates, because they can make a difference.
No, for sure. I try to urge every congressperson I talk to be that person.
Yeah.
But I do see very real either disinterest or like fear of like going against the grain. And I think now is the best time.
Because there's peer pressure inside those caucuses too.
Yeah, but right now is the best possible time to make that bold statement, especially because like if there's any silver lining to Donald Trump like shattering how politics was conducted in this country, it's that. With AOC's Taiwan answer, going back to that, everyone is panning it. They even did the no edit, like I think it was Politico that did the shitty edit where they just go put the ahs and ums in there. Like, you clean up Trump every day. Come on. That's fucking bullshit. We all know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
But again, like a Trump. I think about like a leftist Trump, right? Obviously, there's a lot of structural hurdles against such a thing, but like a leftist Trump, how would a leftist Trump answer that question? Be like, why do I care about it? I mean, they're Chinese. Let them deal with it. You know, something like that with delivered with confidence, I think would be appealing to Americans broadly. I think Americans would go, yeah, why do I care about that?
To me, my version of that answer, which is someone who's probably a little, is just like, you know what? My policy is we should try to not have a war there. You know.
Yeah. I wasn't even saying like this is my policy. I'm just saying like what would like a socialist Trump respond to that?
That's what he says. Like I'm focused on what's happening.
Yeah.
You know,
because he used to say that with Iran. Like he'd be like. In 2015, there was a point where they asked him about like intervention in Iran, and this is, I guess, like before Miriam Adelson or Sheldon Adelson told him what to say about it, right? And he was like, "They're telling me we got to go there, because they're making women cover their faces." And he's like, and he was saying like, it's probably easy for women to wear the hijab. I asked them. They said they want to wear the hijab. He's like, they want to wear it. Well, they don't have to put makeup on.
All right, I'll tell you a story about Cuba that illustrates both how Trump was different, also how he ended up being full of shit. During the primary, the Republican primary, when we done the Cuban normalization, Trump was asked about it. He's like, I think it's fine. Like maybe I get a better deal, but it's fine. And then I heard in 2016. That the Trump organization was down in Cuba scouting real estate properties because they wanted to develop hotels and golf courses.
I'm gonna be honest. I wish they were still invested in that.
No, that's what Trump with absent any. If Trump was Trump, like his deal, he would have gotten into power in 2017 and said, "Hey, I want the Trump organization to develop all the keys off of the coast of Cuba," but instead he got co-opted by these hardliners, in South Florida, and he just turns on a dime, right? And so he's not like I agree with you. His critiques of American foreign policy sometimes completely overlap with some of my critiques, but he doesn't even act on those critiques.
No,
and I think there's an opportunity though because he's like a hurricane who's blowing everything down. And the good news about that is none of this Biden stuff like America's back and no. When you have a hurricane, you don't renovate, you rebuild something different, And so we have this opportunity on the back end of this, assuming there is a back end, to not just kind of tinker around the edges, but to actually imagine a totally different kind of international order. Like that's what should we be talking to the Chinese about? That, like, what are we doing together on climate, on AI? Instead of AI race, like, how about putting some fucking guardrails around this technology so it doesn't take all our jobs and become autonomous weapons? There's a lot of stuff to talk to the Chinese about. But if you're in like a race with them on everything or a Cold War with them on everything, like you're not going to solve those problems.
And from what I understand, talking to like even Chinese dissidents and people who are very supportive of the Chinese government, the consistent thing that I hear is that China is incredibly responsive to America, to whatever America is saying around the world and whatever America is saying about China. So in moments where they feel as though like America might, take an adversarial tone against China, they really add more domestic repression because they're like, we don't want any sort of instability in the country. I guess maybe America shouldn't know about that because then they're going to keep doing it. And I mean, I guess they're doing it regardless. But like the way I see it, one thing I did want to talk to you about was specifically Ukraine, because I think a lot of people look to October 7 as like the complete shattering of like the international rule-based order, right? But I think it was before then.
All the cracks are there, yeah.
I think, well, I mean, yeah, it was, from my perspective, from my tradition, obviously this was always a sham.
Yeah.
And I believe that it was this design was purely beneficial to like Western capital interests, a constant imperialism, extraction of natural resources from the periphery, from the global south, creating like a more pliant labor force that we can use and abuse, and offshoring our domestic industries, which led to, crippling austerity and worse material conditions for the American labor force overall. But Russia's actions in Ukraine and then October 7, so close together, like so closely packaged together, is what completely shattered people's understanding of this. And I don't think we've experienced the repercussions of that yet. I don't think that like, I think the world is only now revolting against it when you see, protests, like steady protests in European capitals against like their government's lack of interest in issuing any sort of condemnation towards Israel.
Yeah.
It's making people realize that like maybe liberal democracy is not working. And I don't think a lot of leadership understands that.
Yeah.
Like I don't think the American government is aware of it even. I think they just kind of are like, oh no, it's going to be fine. We're going to put the cat back in the bag.
I mean, there's all built-in hypocrisy in American foreign policy. But when you stand up like the Biden administration did and say Vladimir Putin is a war criminal because the ICC is, got an indictment out on him because he's killed Ukrainian kids and kidnapped Ukrainian kids, all true, and then turn around and condemn the ICC, same ICC that is prosecuting this same war crimes, right?
Yeah.
Literally, like
with greater severity.
The
too,
killing
like
of children, the collective punishment of a population, and you are then the amount. You don't need to be a foreign policy expert.
No,
you don't have to. There's no nuance or it's complicated. That is fucking bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And if your rules-based order is essentially we get to select when we use these tools to punish only our geopolitical adversaries, and we are completely immune from any of that, then there is no rules-based order already, right?
Yeah.
And that I think that's it was like the curtain being pulled back.
Yeah, it's the third worldist position. Ironically, it's like something. Like,
it's not new. It's not new to anybody from
I grew up in Turkey, so my understanding was exactly this.
Yeah,
and when I brought it to America, people did not like it at all. When I say it, for years and years, from my own personal experience, like when I did this advocacy, when I talked about foreign policy from the perspective of like the victims of American empire, American imperialism, people would say, I'm an America hater. I hate America. Get the fuck out of the country. But I think now it's infinitely easier for Americans to even understand as well.
It is. In part because the emperor has no clothes. Like the Iraq War, from the Iraq War, I mean, the idea that the people in charge kind of could be trusted to know what they were doing after that, I feel like that was shattered, and that was 20 plus years ago now, right? People just keep getting that confirmed for them, right? So whatever emerges on the other side of this is going to have to look different necessarily from what came before. Now, the danger of the Ukraine piece, though, is that the one thing that the rules-based order succeeded in is preventing a World War III, right? So like all kinds of other things.
Nukes, I think.
That and no nuclear war, no World War III. And so when all of a sudden you have one of the major powers, invading and violating the sovereignty of another one, and now Trump's doing the same. I mean, we've done it. So like the Iraq War, like I'm not suggesting we hadn't done it either. So Iraq was a big part of this too. I think someone could fairly point out that it wasn't Ukraine, it was Iraq, where suddenly post-Cold War, it was like, wait a second. Now that there's no Cold War, no risk of World War III, no risk of nuclear armed conflict between the U.S. and Soviet Union, that was America saying, well, that means now we can do whatever we want, And so Putin was like, well, why can't I do whatever I want, I don't think that makes him right in any way, shape, or form. I think what he's doing is horrific.
Yeah.
The danger is, the reason you really do need rules is because when there are no rules, you get nationalism kind of run amok. And the wrong strongman comes along, and all of a sudden, the great powers are bumping into each other in Taiwan and in the Arctic or in Eastern Europe, and then we're in a whole different fucking ballgame.
Yeah, I mean, it's still proxies. Like I don't foresee this turning into like state versus state warfare, especially between nuclear armed states.
Yeah,
but of course, the proxies are so devastating for those who are stuck in the middle powers.
If you're in Sudan, or if you're in even if you're just a middle power and you're just like, I'm just trying to like negotiate trade deals and figure out like how to get clean energy, and I've got these lunatics fighting over my heads,
So where do you think we go from here with Ukraine in particular? Because like, I think, as much as I want to criticize Trump, and I certainly do criticize Trump in the way that he's handled Ukraine, like the showboating, the weird admiration or not even admiration for Putin, but like the ways in which he talks about Ukraine versus the ways in which he talks about Vladimir Putin, I think has offered setbacks to Ukraine as well. Yeah. Like it's definitely embarrassed Zelensky for sure,
and weakened Zelensky.
Yeah, and that's not helpful for anyone really, other than I guess it does help Russia quite a bit. But I think he also recognizes his powerlessness, because like a lot of people in the national security apparatus have this attitude where it's like, no, as long as we just like keep giving guns to Ukraine, they'll just keep putting on a fight. And now it's in a stalemate, one that is actually a beneficial stalemate for Russia.
Because it's bigger. So a stalemate favors the bigger party.
Exactly. And I don't know, like, I mean, what Trump said to Zelensky was, you don't have the cards. But I don't think Trump holds the cards either. Because in the absence of like somehow trying to force the hand of India to no longer be a secondary market for Russian energy to enter the international marketplace, which is also going to be impossible, because why would India do that? India is making a lot of money as a mediator, and India can go to China, as you also pointed out. Like, there's not really a lot of additional pressures that they can apply to Russia other than just like trying to come to a managed solution. And as long as Vladimir Putin knows that, and he understands the domestic pressures that Trump has, as far as like promising that he was going to, end the war day one, he has not a lot of room here for negotiation. And I think that's a hard recognition to come to if you are a national security guy, especially in comparison to like the last 50, 60, or especially the last 30 years, right? I don't think America has the same motion that it did, the same power that it did in terms of like dealing with foreign adversaries that are crazy enough to go out and engage in like military action.
Yeah. So here's what I'd say, and here's where I probably do put a little bit more currency into alliances and the whole transatlantic arrangement. I agree that the best case, that there was something ghoulish about a certain kind of national security mindset of like, this is great, we'll keep arming them, and they'll weaken the Russians, and we get to make heroic speeches while the Ukrainians are fighting and dying on the front lines. And actually, there was a very counterproductive raising of expectations.
Yeah.
Like victories at hand. If you're reading like, The Atlantic, it was always like victories around the corner, the counteroffensive is going to work,
Yeah.
And I think the best case scenario for Ukraine at this point is they're going to lose territory. Like, they're not going to reclaim Crimea. They're not going to reclaim the parts of the Luhansk and Donetsk in eastern Ukraine that Russia occupies. But if they can preserve their sovereignty, that they're not going to be invaded again by Russia, and become attached to, what they want is essentially to be in Europe. In the European Union. Let's put not NATO, because NATO, you're not going to,
That's not.
I don't think Americans are going to go to war. I don't think you have to get every NATO country to agree that you will go to war for Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. So essentially, if you could ceasefire the conflict and then use the ensuing time to incorporate Ukraine into institutions and to fortify them, through reconstruction and economic arrangements as a part of Europe, and they could look up in 20 years and they've lost territory. They may never recognize that territory isn't theirs, but they're a sovereign country, and the people there can live in peace and have arrangements with Europe. That would be great for them. It wouldn't be, maybe great's the wrong word. That would be the best outcome available to them right now. What would be great to them is obviously to have their entire sovereignty. I think the reason Trump's behavior makes that worse is that's kind of all premised on political agreement among the United States and Europe about what the plan is. How is Ukraine going to be rebuilt? How is Ukraine going to be incorporated into the EU? What is the nature of the Ukrainian military such that it's sufficient that Russia won't want to invade them again? And if Putin's negotiating across the table, and he sees everybody on the other side of the table fighting with each other, he sees Trump beating up on Zelensky, he sees Trump freaking out the Europeans that he's going to invade Greenland, then that makes the negotiation so much easier for him.
Oh, yeah.
Because he can just keep grinding away at the Ukrainians. The attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure has gone way up since Trump became president. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And it's not about arms, it's about the political circumstance. It's that these guys are fighting with each other. So I can just kind of do what I want here. And so that's where I think
and
he's
also because of Israel too. Like we're so hyper focused on like defensive Israel, even though Israel.
Well, that after October 7th, you could feel the tension shift. It was like a spotlight that had been on Ukraine just moves over here. And suddenly we're sending arms there, and the Biden administration is spending all its time there instead of on Ukraine, you know? And that too advantaged Putin, right? Like Putin was at his weakest in this conflict when there was a kind of political consensus. This is wrong. We support the Ukrainians. I mean, the ICC thing we just talked about too, that helped Putin too. Because, you know, it might have been uncomfortable for certain countries to host Vladimir Putin who are ICC signatories. But after October 7th and after what happened with the ICC, where the U.S. is attacking the ICC and sanctioning the ICC, well, then it's like, well, these, you know, I don't need to play by these rules, right?
Yeah.
So it just, that's my
he
critique.
came to Alaska.
Yeah. So it's not that he's an indicted war criminal came to Alaska.
Yeah.
Just like Netanyahu's come here, like how I can't lost track
Well,
of how
I
many
mean,
times.
that's different.
Yeah.
That's like, Israel's little America. So,
But I think that the outcome, again, this is one of these things where I can agree with Trump's kind of impulse, like stop this war. It's not going well. People are just getting killed. But he's not like the way he's going about it is making that in some ways harder because Putin doesn't have an incentive to stop. You know, like he's like these guys are, as long as these guys are arguing with each other, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. You know.
yeah. I don't see anything like I don't see any like reasonable way out of it. And for years, people yelled at me because I said like leading up to Russia's invasion or even after Russia's invasion, I said like the best possible outcome would have been a firm commitment to like Minsk.
Yeah.
Which you know.
Which we was negotiated when Obama was president.
Yeah, but like that would have been the best option. And then the what was it? The 18-point plan.
Yeah.
Right after the Kyiv offensive halted.
Yeah.
Was again an incredible exit ramp.
And Zelensky's apparently pressured to not accept it. You know?
So I said that at the time, like, because it came so close to like a Boris Johnson visit.
Yeah.
That I thought that was like, you know, strange timing at the very least, to say the least. And people fucking kept saying, I'm pro-Russia for this. Not realizing that like I wanted to, you know, I saw that this was going to be devastating for Ukrainians and even devastating for Russia as well. And now we're just kind of stuck in this situation.
And what was so wrong about that too is that like there was a complete lack of understanding of Russian history, right? Like if you look at Russian history, they're going to be okay with the war of attrition, right? So the idea, the kind of triumphalist idea was they tried to take Kyiv and failed. And so they're going to lose this war. And so we just, you know, we'll start arming them. But Russia is a bigger country. And they have a leader who doesn't care about his casualty rate. And they have a history of doing that.
Say, they throw people at the
Red Army under Stalin, right? Like you can go back into the 19th century. Like they have fought wars of attrition. And so the mistake was that somehow time was going to be on the side of the Ukrainians. Like time is going to be on the side of the bigger country, particularly a country like Russia that has shown that it will absorb tremendous losses like that. So it was a missed opportunity in retrospect.
Yeah.
And you were there at the time, so
yeah, and everyone, no one has stopped. Still, I mean, there's still a lot of. I mean, they're not as loud as they used to be. Weirdly enough, but there's like a sector of like NATO Twitter that I'm sure are in your guys' replies as well. Whenever I do like a Pod Save America appearance or whatever, they're like, this guy's a Russian asset. It's like I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I mean, you can say I have sympathies for the project of the USSR, even though I understand the excesses and all of the problems. But like, Russia is not the USSR at all. It's a capitalist oligarchy that is engaging in irredentist actions.
The thing that drives me nuts is when Republicans call Putin a communist, and I'm like,
God.
do you? I mean, I don't like Putin because he's actually first manifestation of the kind of power structure we were talking about. It's like a super rich guy who runs the country and takes all of its resources and gives it to his friends. and then represses everybody else. Like he is that playbook is being replicated in country after country, right?
Yeah.
And that's my beef with Putin. Not that he's a communist, anything but. You know?
He's also very disrespectful to Lenin, which I think is completely unacceptable. So, yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. But like, I think a lot of people do rely on like people's lack of curiosity.
Yeah, they hear Russia and they think communist.
Yeah. But I do think that, like, even with what Russia has done so far, I think like if they approach the subject of Ukraine or any sort of like intervention that they found to be dangerous from like Western interference that they found to be dangerous, because like, let's be real, there is Western intervention in Ukraine. There was Western intervention in Ukraine, not to justify like an invasion, but I do think that National Endowment for Democracy, civil society organizations, things of that nature are like once those gears start turning, all of the countries that we have designed as foreign adversaries, they see that and they think, oh, this is going to happen. But I think Russia's approach to it should have been similar to like what China is doing. Usually, whenever there's any sort of like whenever there's any sort of instability or any sort of fear, and what I mean by that is they're an energy behemoth. They already had decent negotiations and decent contracts with European countries. They should have just been like, no, we're an energy provider. We don't need to go and invade Ukraine and kill a bunch of Ukrainian people.
We can use that leverage.
Yeah.
Because I think what's interesting about the National Endowment for Democracy stuff is...
Also, do you want water?
Oh, yeah, sure. That whole democracy funding apparatus, right? And so for people who don't follow this is basically like a grant giving.
Oh, people follow.
Okay. So
maybe they don't have the same opinion of NED as you might, but
no, because I see the critique when you start that in the 90s in Central and Eastern Europe, and you're pushing against this kind of open door, and then it just keeps moving east, and Putin's view is this is what's complicated, right? Is that Ukraine he fundamentally doesn't see as distinct from Russia, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
So he sees it as kind of, and that's where you get the discordance. But that model needs to change. Like that model,
and he said it as such. For the record, like I think this is a Duginist approach. Like it's not. This is like I don't lend that much credence to like the national security argument. Although I do think it's a concern. I think there's probably a different ambition there, which is to like restore the might of like some sort of like Russian Empire. Like leave a lasting legacy. As this great power in the world.
To your point, though, because if it was just this is where I break a bit from the people, because I agree NATO enlargement to Ukraine and Georgia was Bush did that on the way out the door. Right. And that was never going to be approved by NATO because there's NATO. And if you look at it, the first thing Putin did after that is invaded Georgia. I mean, everybody forgets the Georgia invasion. It didn't start in Crimea. It started in Georgia. But if he really wanted to if he had the narrow objective of making sure that Ukraine isn't going to be in NATO, he had sufficient leverage with energy to bring about, to make it such that there's no way every NATO country is ever going to agree to bring Ukraine in. I think he did have a Duginist, like this is part of the Russian imperial space. We go back to Kiev Rus. I mean, he's written about it. Like I think he believes
talked about it with. No, I think so too. He's also talked about it with Tucker Carlson. For hours on end. And Tucker was like, can you simplify this? And he was like, hold on, let me explain it to you in greater detail.
I've been in the room with Putin, and he, it's interesting. Like he'll do like Obama would when he went into Crimea, and then then they had these kind of Russian-backed separatists that they were arming in Luhansk and Donetsk. Obama would keep pressing him, like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, Obama's a very rationalist person, right? Like, I need to know, because we're kind of in a negotiation here, and it's a negotiation that led up to Minsk. What are you trying to achieve? And instead of answering the question, would always frustrate Obama, he would go into history, and it could be pretty ancient history, too. It wasn't just NATO. And but that was in a way his answer. His answer was, I'm trying to kind of restore the historical greatness of Russia and push out our boundaries.
He's trying to do a little bit of this is an attitude that I've seen in China, both personally seen in China, but also have seen with Chinese domestic policy in terms of stamping out any sort of separationist movement, separatist movement.
Yeah.
Is that he sees Ukraine as a part of Russia. I think he's those are not. That's not a separate.
Almost like China looks at Tibet.
It's this is just historic Russia. This is historic China, and that's it. He wants to achieve it for either personal ambitions or for personal, or because he believes in this grand historical reason. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Ultimately, he just wants to bring it under the banner of the Russian Federation. But I guess the difference is with respect to Tibet or autonomous regions in China
or Taiwan.
There is
Hong Kong.
Their machinations have been very different. The reason why I say Tibet especially because it's even the CIA gave up on it. I think it was literally in the 60s, right? Where they were just we're not even going to try this. It's fine.
I think, and look, the National Endowment of Democracy point taken, I do think that one of the things, it did seem like he was somewhat surprised by the sense of Ukrainian nationalism after both 2014 and 2022, I think he genuinely believed that there were, maybe not everybody, but there were at least more people in Ukraine they would have had an affinity for wanting to be part of Russia. And I do think genuinely that what we saw in Ukraine over the last decade is whether they're NED people or not, that Ukrainians think of themselves as Ukrainian. Not all, there's some people I think that are probably more open. I mean, Crimea is interesting because we always get attacked for not doing more to stop that. But
I was just about to bring it up, but I'm glad you are.
Nobody fought back. Now
75%. If 75%
the Tatars did
of the no. But I'm saying but the Tatars had already been displaced a long time ago under the USSR, and the Russification initiatives had been set in motion far before then.
Stalin,
exactly. So it's not like Crimea was comprised of people that ethnically identified and had sympathies for Russia, and also Sevastopol was already on a loaner agreement to Russia anyway. It was his entry point into the Black Sea. Of course, they were no, this is where our military base is. This is our military. This is a part of our. This is This is an extension of Russia basically, and it was a mistake to give up on it in the 90s. Was their attitude overall. And not only that, but also, like you said, the annexation of Crimea was very different endeavor in comparison to what we have seen for the last 4 years now.
And the resistance, I mean, look, I'm against annexing borders, whoever's doing it.
Yeah.
Whether it's the Golan Heights or Crimea or wherever. But it is the case that, and this happened, what was interesting is they move into Crimea. I remember it happened like this. And I get called in the Situation Room. They're in charge of government buildings. There's no fighting happening. And it's a fait accompli, essentially. Now, when they moved into Donetsk and Luhansk, immediately people were fighting back.
Yeah.
For sure. And so it was interesting.
And even other regions, because here's the thing. Eastern Ukraine had, the further east you go in Ukraine, the more people were sympathetic to Russia.
Or they're Russian speakers.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the case, I think, before the invasion. And I think that might have played a role in why Vladimir Putin thought that they would be, ironically enough, welcomed as liberators.
Yeah. No, he made the same mistake. Because now you look at a place
they were not welcomed as liberators at all. Because when you blow up the entire, when you blow up an entire block of the city, even if you're in Kharkiv, for example, which again, if you look at polls before the invasion,
that's what I was going to point to,
are much more sympathetic to Russia. And post-invasion, of course they're not sympathetic to Russia because they're no, you fucking killed my grandparents.
Kharkiv, which was in Putin's mind was probably this big Russian-speaking city on the border. they are now like adamantly Ukrainian nationalists there
Yeah.
because their whole city's been bombed and the power has been cut off. And this is why war as statecraft is the best way to turn off the very population that you're seeking to control. So it's going to be. I left. I mean, I was in Munich, and I left pretty depressed because I don't see the path to ending this anytime soon because Putin feels like he's grinding them down. There's not an agreed upon kind of negotiating strategy among the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Americans, and it just feels like this. I don't know. It just feels like a lot of people are suffering for inches of territory at a time.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating. It's horrible to see, but there are people making money off of it.
There are people making money off it.
The military-industrial complex is offloading their surplus weapons or like older equipment, and then you go back to the government and you get we just our supplies diminish. We got to get new weapons now. We got to build new weapons. You get to test out new procurement strategies, new strategies of warfare in general. I feel like we're moving in the direction of drone warfare.
That's a hugely important point.
Yeah,
Ukraine is like a lab.
Gaza too. Yeah,
it's a lab. It's same with Gaza. It's a lab for AI, drones, autonomous warfare. The Russian military has, all these national security types who were like they're going to be weakened in this fight. The way they've innovated on the battlefield, they have a much more capable military today than they did 3-4 years ago when the war started.
And those technologies are much more affordable.
Yeah,
and not only that, but also. They also create a unique opportunity for destabilization in countries that America also wants to keep destabilized to a certain degree. The cartel in Jalisco, the CGNG, New Generation, Cartel Jalisco New Generation. El Mecho was executed in a operation this past week, and I was fascinated. I after looking into it a little bit, I found out that the Jalisco cartel, largest cartel in Mexico, maybe even the largest like drug dealer enterprise in the world, right? They were sending their troops, they were sending their hitmen to Ukraine to learn about drone warfare, and they brought back those techniques to Mexico.
This is why it's not good to have all these wars going. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why it's not good, but they beget other wars, or they beget other violence, or they beget other capabilities. Like we're living with far too much conflict. The goal should be none for humanity. But it's also the case that, the North Koreans are in Russia. They're getting technology in exchange for that. The Iranian drones are up there. Israel's testing out all these AI capabilities in Gaza. It's an ominous feeling that. And I didn't know that.
We're using AI targeting with Anthropic. There's this new saga taking place in the Department of Defense or Department of War. Sorry,
this is a huge issue.
It was the Lavender. It was the Lavender program that 972 investigated and found out was like they were creating new targets by utilizing AI because human beings are just simply not capable of creating that many targets for striking. And AI is very useful if you're conducting a genocide because you can just kill whoever and be like, well, the AI told me this is a real target that we need to strike.
Or the AI can locate a phone number and not care if there's like 20 kids in the building where that phone is.
Exactly. Or deliberately, because one was the Lavender targeting system, which would have like a couple different points. If you had if you had changed your SIM card at any point, which happens all the time in general, but it certainly happens all the time in Gaza because people need to use eSIMs. That automatically meant that by that targeting system, that meant that you were a Hamas fighter or a member of the Palestinian resistance. And then Daddy's Home is even scarier than that. It was a mass surveillance strategy where like if the target, if the person that was declared a target actually walked into their home, their residence, Daddy's Home would trigger and they would blow up the entire house.
Yeah,
because they knew that was where the fighter would be at.
Yeah, And all Anthropic is saying is, number one, no mass surveillance of Americans, and number two, no autonomous decisions made in the use of violence, essentially.
Yeah,
And,
which is ironic because it has the capacity to backfire. And I think the Anthropic CEO is like probably engaging in ass covering. Now he says that the company cannot in good conscience accede to Pentagon's demands that allow wider use of its technology. As of like literally a couple hours ago, this just came out. I think the reason why they're saying that, and they were very clear on it, was, guys, one, this is unconscionable, and I'm sure there's plenty of engineers that think this is, unacceptable. But if you don't have a human safeguarding this process, the AI could just decide that the American soldiers are actually the targets that need to be eliminated all of a sudden. What if there's like a higher utility purpose for the AI and that it decides, no, the real enemies are literally the American assets, and they just start lasering American assets.
The insane thing about all this is that there's no effort to regulate these tech. If we lived in any kind of relatively normal times, there would be domestically and internationally. Domestically, you'd be trying to regulate this, and then you'd be negotiating treaties with other countries about, like, in the same way that
like a nuclear arms treaty.
In the same way we'd be treating AI like we treated nuclear technology. It has to be like thoroughly guardrailed. There has to be regulation over how you develop clean, nuclear energy. And what's happening is our system is so dysfunctional that there's not even any expectation. Now, some that's by design. Like, what do Peter Thiel and all these other guys want? They want to break the U.S. government so they can't be regulated.
Yeah.
Why does J.D. Vance go to Europe and give speeches about the AfD and all that? Part of it's like his kind of white nationalist worldview. Part of it is he's trying to break apart the EU so the EU doesn't regulate American AI, right?
Yeah.
And so it's left to the companies to develop terms of service when they should be regulated. I mean, I do give him credit for at least having some line that he's drawing. I mean, that's more than you see from some of his competitors. But the answer is actually to have real regulation. I mean, a Democrat. If I was running for president as a Democrat, I would be coming right for these issues, right? And the job displacement ones are more important to people, but the absence of regulation, the monopolization that's taking place, and the idea that we're counting on a CEO in a room with Pete Hegseth to figure out what the terms of service are to self-regulate, it's an insane thing.
AIs can't stop recommending nuclear strikes and war game simulations. Leading AIs from OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google opted to use nuclear weapons in simulated war games in 95% of cases.
Because, I mean, honestly, like, I'm going to reveal myself as a late Gen Xer here, but did you see War Games? I mean, it's literally the scenario from that movie. Like, if the AI is playing a game, it wants to win, and so you reach for your biggest weapon, I mean, if you don't put guardrails around this stuff, I mean, and the future of warfare is autonomous, you're going to be in pretty big fucking trouble. Anthropic knows where the technology is going more than DoD does, right?
Yeah.
It's not the Pentagon that is developing the technology; it is Anthropic. And the fact that the Anthropic CEO is like, wait a second, I know where this technology is going. I want to build these guardrails into my systems.
Yeah.
And Hegseth's like, no, we can't handle that. We can't have that.
Or I mean,
it's crazy.
Outside of the guardrails, they were literally just saying you have to have a human sign off on it. Mm-hmm. You have to have a human give final approval, which again is a system that you can
and should be a principle across all AI. There should be like an emergency brake that a human being can pull at any given time. And if you open the door a crack to that not being the case, I mean, I don't know where we are.
Yeah, it's truly devastating. But I was gonna say, what do you think about Claudia Sheinbaum? Are you familiar with the Morena Party? Have you looked into what's going on in Mexico? What's your that's the last foreign policy take I have for you.
Good, because I have to grab my kids in a few minutes. I like Claudia Sheinbaum. I think that. One, she has simultaneously demonstrated a way to have a different economic model. I mean, not just she, but the Moreno Party, AMLO started that, obviously. A different economic model inside of Mexico. In a country that had been very corporatist. She's not, it's not dismantled, but there has been redistribution of wealth and opportunity inside the country. But also, she is, like, there's all this, buzz, all these people getting super excited on the right about the kind of right-wing, populists, the Miles and the Bukeles. she's offering a different model of a leftist politics that can succeed inside of Mexico. She's been able to stand up to Trump at times, at least. She's been able to support Cubans. And I will tell you, I was traveling in Latin America recently, meeting with a lot of kind of opposition politicians. They all idolized Claudia Sheinbaum. Like, she's become what Lula was, in the kind of the aughts. Like, people on the left, people just in opposition to kind of the rising tide of right-wing authoritarianism in Latin America, they look to her. So I think when I look out at the world and people ask me, like, who do you find interesting? I find Pedro Sanchez and Claudia Sheinbaum both to be pretty interesting. Yeah. Because and they do it, they have a consistent set of values across domestic and foreign policy, and they're consistent. And they're offering something that is different than kind of mushy globalization or MAGA. And that's badly needed.
Okay, I know you got a dip. Last question, I promise. This is the most consistent question I've heard from the chat as well. How have your views on Israel evolved from being a part of the national security apparatus to where you are now?
I think that, when I was there, I had the reputation as someone who was unusually critical of Israel. So I never had...
Ben Hamas Rhodes.
Yeah, I mean, so I never was rosy about it. I will say, though, that I used the talking points. You can find... And I believed in them. The two-state solution, now that was being beaten out of me... while I was in government, because the first Obama term, I was like, we got to get in the peace process and negotiate something. And all I saw is Bibi use that as cover. Let's have some meetings with like Abu Mazen, who has who's totally corruptly, simultaneously neutered by the Israeli government. And But anyway, Bibi's using negotiations as cover to just keep expanding settlements, keep moving Israeli politics to the right, And so what I'd say is my evolution is just actually a confrontation with reality itself, which is Israel has no interest in there ever being a Palestinian state. And so it is not sufficient to stand up and say, well, I hope there's a two-state solution. My views have evolved too in the sense that, well, if that's the case, then there have to be meaningful consequences, i.e. the United States should not be providing military assistance to the Israeli government when it's committing war crimes in Gaza or when it's annexing the West Bank. Like, we don't need to, there's not like some automaticity here that we need to be providing arms to a government like that is so fundamentally the antithesis of what I believe in terms of its political orientation at home or in terms of its policy towards the Palestinians. So I think to me, Hasan, it was honestly just like, it's not that I learned, the evolution was just forcing myself to confront reality. And so I don't give myself credit for it. It's more just like, no, wait, I can't keep using this language, or I can't keep saying what bothers me is a lot of times people will even say, the Israeli government is committed to the annexation of the West Bank, the project of Greater Israel that could go into southern Syria, into southern Lebanon, but I'm still for giving them military assistance. So to me, the evolution is just being consistent, and if you actually believe something, that has to actually lead to a policy consequence, right?
Yeah.
And that to me is you still see people not quite getting there. Like they can issue all the critiques, they can even use certain language, but they can't bring themselves. Do I believe in the ICC? I do. So therefore, the ICC should be able to make decisions about whether to prosecute Bibi Netanyahu. Why do we get to come in and say, no, you're wrong about this one?
Yeah, sanctions.
So to me, it's totally just a matter. And I've been called names too. I've been anti-Semite or whatever, which is funny because I come, my mom's Jewish, and but this is about actually just addressing reality. It's just about seeing things as they are and calling it like you see it, and then having views about what should happen that are consistent. Because you can't say what's happening and then say, but nothing should change in terms of U.S. policy here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we already have laws in the books, like the Leahy law, that should automatically be triggered in this situation. Yeah. That I think it was, well, two things I want to say. One, I was listening to Kat Abu-Ghazaleh running in Illinois, who's of Palestinian descent, up against Daniel Bliss, and she's done a phenomenal job so far. Yeah. despite being, 26 years old, formerly working at Media Matters, like comes from an organizing background as well. But she said, like, we should be conditioning all aid across the board to
every country.
all of our
Yeah.
allies
Th-
all
yeah.
the time. Like the notion that like
it's not singling somebody out.
yeah, the notion that like we can't condition, because they were like, well, what about defensive weapons? Like this distinction that is made all the time, and this is a major area of disagreement that I have with even Matt Duss as well, which is that
I went farther than that. Yeah.
yeah, I think like the notion of like offering anti-aircraft battery systems to like Nazi Germany during World War II would be out of the question. Should we give defensive weapons? I mean, there's Russian civilians in Russia. Should we give defensive weapons to Russia? Like, no, of course not, right?
Well, but it's also just because if you believe that war crimes are being committed,
Yeah.
which is obvious, why give weapons to country committing war crimes? And defense expenditures are fungible. So what you give them in defensive opens up space for offensive, and it's a principle of conditionality. Kat's right; it's not singling out; it's being consistent across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I'd say in terms of I used to try to get in the room and persuade or argue with, the APACs of the world.
FDD,
And those guys wouldn't even talk to me. But I will say, pretty quickly when I got out, I was like, wait a second, like. These people are on the other side of everything I believe, not just in terms of Israel, but in terms of financing far-right politics in this country.
Yeah, domestic politics in general.
And so I don't think there should be a carve-out where it's like, but we should take a lot of money from them. Like, so it's just like, no, this is a dysfunctional relationship, and when you're in a dysfunctional relationship, you should end it. And the Democratic Party will be healthier. If it doesn't have this hybrid where like its own voters believe something, but a number of politicians are still taking a lot of money from AIPAC or AIPAC affiliated groups. It ties the Democratic Party knots, which, by the way, may be the point. It may be the point to tie us in knots, and we're arguing with ourselves about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anyway, I would talk to you for hours on
thanks.
this. But,
this is great.
thank you so much for coming on, Ben Rhodes, everybody. Where can people find you?
So Pod Save the World is my podcast, and I have a Substack that I just launched where I just wrote about Iran. Actually, got a book coming out in May, so I'm popping up wherever I can.
I'm gonna try to convince you to come with me to Cuba. Hopefully, we'll see.
I bet. Yeah, no,
I know you've been.
Yeah. No, we'll see. I'd love to get back down there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
All right.
And thank your mom for.